Hello, everyone. This is Carlos Cabrera, your host for FinTech Today. In today's interview, we have a very interesting guest. His name is Hector de la Pena. He's a U.S. educated banker with many years of experience in traditional finance and also crypto. He has very interesting views on how crypto can evolve. Welcome, Hector, to FinTech Today.
Thank you for having me.
So tell me, how do you see all this new developments with blockchain and say private blockchains such as Quorum evolve in the next few years?
Yeah, I think we'll continue to see people build behind the scenes. We're in a bear market right now. I think everyone knows that, but I think teams that have a purpose and have been building quality projects, they'll continue to build.
And do you think that the development of private blockchains will be something that will become a norm in the next few years?
I don't know how much it'll be adopted across the board, but I do see many large organizations that'll continue to build on their own private blockchains, as well as others that might adopt it for other purposes, especially when it comes to payment systems, as well as identity verification.
Right. And in terms of the identification, like you were talking about, what how do you see that evolve in terms of how crypto can become like a more of a safe ground for the day-to-day small time investor?
Yeah, I think having payments pegged with identity verification is very important because that way, I mean, we can ascertain who gets to receive what kind of money. We saw that there was a massive amount of fraud perpetrated by CRB. So a lot of people that conducted identity theft, not a lot of it was placed under scrutiny as it should have been. So I think this would be one perfect use case where people would definitely benefit as a whole in society. I mean, I don't know how much fraud was perpetrated from it, but I do know that this is one mechanism to further minimize the risk of fraud.
Right. And in terms of the how all of this in terms, that we talked about the the different central bank digital currencies that are being developed. How do you see this evolve in terms of, say, other countries apart from the U.S. Digital dollar that's already in the works, developed, say, China and the rest of the countries?
Yeah, I think right now there's multiple countries that have live CBDCs. For example, Nigeria has its own e-naira. Multiple countries in the Caribbean region have their own CBDCs. Bahamas, I believe, has their own sand dollar. So these are already live. Their intended purpose was that of retail adoption. So I think those will be the initial countries that have been testing their CBDCs and their use cases and how much adoption has been taking place. But when it comes to more large actors like China or Russia, one thing that I noticed was that these two countries have been acquiring a lot of rare minerals. So, I mean, having countries that adopt scarce resources like gold, nuclear energy, like uranium, and so forth, is definitely a big plus for them, as opposed to only being backed by good faith and so forth. So having something that in the background will definitely help their currencies in general. In terms of their use cases, I really don't know what their plan is in the short term or in the long term, but I think that definitely lies in the architecture and use cases, whether it be being permissionless or permissioned, having a say in who gets to transact with who, what the uses for these CBDCs, and so forth.
And you think that in these times, you expect, say, especially small countries to develop the central bank digital currencies with the backing of say, minerals such as gold or silver? Do you think that that is something that's feasible in these times?
Um, I'm not sure if, because that would depend on the country itself. But let's say a country that is very small and has most of its population scattered in rural areas. So the problem there is that they're not necessarily banked, right? And
Right.
so, but again, that would depend on the architecture. So going back to the architecture, if CBDCs are used hand in hand with financial institutions, that might not solve the problem. But if they're done in a decentralized capacity where there's no intermediaries, then that might be something. In terms of its backing, again, I think that the value of a currency is again backed by what it's really behind, right? So having gold, for example, as the U.S. had for so many years, was one of its cornerstones. It moved off of the gold standard a long time ago, and now it relies on other things associated with its safety, its safe haven status, and its geopolitical aspect, as well as its large reserve amount across the world.
Right. Right. That makes sense. It's a case by case scenario. And what else in the next 5 years catches your eye and makes you either excited or worried about the development of digital assets?
Yeah, I think it's balancing out regulations
Mhm.
so that there's a lot of creativity and there's a lot of freedom, but there's also a, a significant amount of freedom while also coexisting with security. So we see a lot of fraud and investment scams and so forth everywhere in crypto. So I think it'd be good to have some form of light regulation that's aligned with the intended purpose of crypto, just basically protecting people. Um, and I think that's really the key right now.
And do you expect that overregulation can, in say, in North America, can affect the development of crypto, or do you think that crypto is to a level that they just say light, well, the light regulations already in place, but say more regulations will actually not be not be a factor in its development at this point? Or do you think that the new regulations that are in talks and works will halt the development of these currencies in specifically North America?
Yeah, I think one of the big pros of having regulation is that it'll open up the floodgates because when you have regulation, you have good faith from investors. So a company that's regulated, like, everyone's going to trust that a lot more. If it's something that isn't regulated, people don't know what their practices are, what their activities inside look like, and so forth. So that's a big pro of having regulation in place. It's the adoption, the real adoption, right?
All right.
There's also another aspect, which is just experimenting things. I think initially, at least from a few years ago, a lot of people in the US had to go and move out and set up shop in other places abroad, namely like in Asia, because they felt that they were a lot less constrained. So I think these are just two different sides that need to be assessed.
So what you're saying is basically that there needs to be a balance into the regulation.
Yeah, I think we're still exploring that as a whole, as an industry.
Yeah.
We're still exploring uh, what's being regulated, what other countries are doing, and so forth.
Wow. Makes sense. And I know that a lot of times in crypto we find that we talked about traditional finance and also the development of country-backed central bank digital currencies. How bad when it comes to the dark webs and this sort of hidden nets that exist in crypto? how prevalent are they nowadays with the light regulation that uh, has been in place so far?
Okay, so right off the bat, I think the most important fact to consider is that most of the financial crimes are actually taking place in traditional finance and not in crypto. So that's the biggest point to that. Setting that aside, for all transactions that are carried in a listed manner, I think there's already quite a number of blockchain analytics companies that are leveraging their technology, and regulators and governments around the world are using this. And because most of the activity takes place in blockchains like Ethereum and Bitcoin, these are
Right.
easily checked on a public ledger. So it's a lot better, in my opinion, to look at these activities as opposed to traditional finance because of privacy legislation. So it makes it a lot more difficult to trace funds across multiple different organizations that house their own private information.
I see. I see. And well, anything else that you want to add to what you perceive in the next few years that will come? I know that, for instance, there's a lot of talk about the new web version, and I know that in the latest conferences there's a lot of excitement about it. What's your take on this new merge and this new upgrade of Ethereum?
Yeah, I think it's a great thing, but I think what'll take Ethereum to its intended purpose, at least closer to its intended purpose, is the sharding. So that'll lower fees. The Ethereum fees during the last bull run were crushing to retail investors. So that's one obstacle that a lot of people felt, and so that's what actually drove a lot of people away from Ethereum and into other EVM compatible chains like Avalanche and so forth. So that's one thing. I think the Web3 is still going to continue to test things, test ideas, and continue to build. There's so much in terms of identity, in terms of interacting with one another, decentralizing, as well as just building communities.
Great. Well, definitely, we appreciate the time that you've taken to share with us your views, and keep us updated on your next moves. And we'll be here for you, and we'll wish you all the success.
Thanks for having me, Carl. Appreciate it.
Thank you.